And we get, here we go, recording started. Recordings live forever, and we've got a lot of contact going on the back end. So what you say matters. Your audience is universal, worldwide, and what we do matters. That's the important thing. We are going to be doing some new formatting in the future. That's just an FYI for those of you who know that we're always thinking big and better. And this is all part of that. Excited for all of you members who are listening to this in the future, anyone on tonight, be sure and check out the back end of the 1776 Syndicate for members. There's new content going on there all the time. Our whole goal, of course, is to empower people, educate people, get them involved, and keep them involved. If they're going to run campaigns, we want to help them with that, and more importantly, help them succeed in their campaigns. So we've got a lot at stake. I think all of us know that, and that's why we do what we do. Excited tonight to introduce our guest, Sierra Claridge. I've known Sierra for over a decade now, and she never disappoints. She's energetic, enthusiastic, most importantly, involved. And her intelligence and her tenacity are just incredible to see on so many fronts. And when I found out what she was doing with Deliver Fund, I wanted to get her opinion on and her take on this, because it's such an important issue, and it's one that we've dealt with on the preliminary, the outskirts issues with grooming and LGBTQ and all that kind of stuff. In fact, last week's guest was very informative, and people are rising up. Sierra is one of those. I want to first say just a couple of things. I'm going to have Sierra, I'm going to have you fill in the blanks a little bit around this, but your involvement includes, and it's dynamic, search and rescue. You've traveled outside the United States, as many of our members and guests have, all over the world. And when you became an aunt, that was a transforming moment in your life, and that is always wonderful to see. And I can tell you that having great relatives in the fold is life-changing for people. So congratulations for what you do there. And I know about 5 years ago, you said human trafficking came up on your radar, left an impression on you, and you wanted to be part of the solution. And I mentioned last week, and I actually thought about you when I made this. I wrote it down because I thought it was so fitting. We learn on this show as much and are often inspired the most by the actions of ordinary people who get involved. And Sierra, you're one of those. So I have actually been to a presentation dealing with the front end of Deliver Fund, and to have somebody who's just decided that they want to make a difference is incredible to have you on our show. So we appreciate that, and I know you've got some prepared remarks, and we've got some time for Q&A after. I'm excited about that. I promise we will go easy, and but we'll go deep, okay?
Sounds good. And I'll only answer questions if I actually know the answers, and I will be honest if there's something beyond my knowledge, and I can get you the information later.
Your opinion matters as well.
I'll give you my opinion. I'll just make sure and preface that it is my opinion, because I have
very good. All right, thanks.
I do want to apologize. I have a very small apartment and a 5-month-old puppy. I think she's going to be fine, and I have a plethora of things to pass her in the event she starts getting verbal, but I think we're going to be okay. So you just want me to jump in here?
Jump right in. You bet.
All right. So I'm Sierra, and I thought a lot about what I felt was most important to share here. I know there's a dynamic group, a large group of people with diverse backgrounds, but it sounds like everybody to some degree or another has a political intention. So I thought about what I wanted everybody to walk away and be aware of. And so that's my goal tonight, is the information that I felt would be most impactful and most important for you all to be aware of in your daily and hopefully political lives. I'm in a unique position in that I was blessed to spend time working directly in the fight, and I have more knowledge than most. I still don't consider myself to be a subject matter expert. This problem is large and it is complex, and it has so many facets, especially when you look at the difference between labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and then you move into the world, as opposed to just the United States. I have a lot to learn. And just for clarification, I just wanted to say I did work in the background as an analyst. I've never done any undercover or operative work. Those people are spectacularly talented, and I am thankful for their skills. I had the great privilege of meeting some pretty cool people, and their talent far exceeds my own in that direction. That's not something I have the heart or the skill to do, to dive in firsthand. I also want to make sure and communicate that while I did work for Deliver Fund as a contractor, I don't represent them. My thoughts and my opinions are my own and do not reflect those of the organization. That having been said, they are an incredible organization, and I fully support the meaningful and impactful work they do, both in the United States and around the globe. They have both my respect and my financial support. So getting into it a little more here, I was blessed with the opportunity to join the fight for a little over 1.5 years, or thereabouts, working with that nonprofit. Throughout that year, I learned and I unlearned a lot. I fully recognize that we need additional legislation to fight this and give our law enforcement the tools they need to fight this. I do not have the experience or expertise to make those recommendations, but given the group I'm speaking to, I wanted to stress the importance of speaking to those subject matter experts, those in law enforcement, as well as prosecutors, your district attorneys, your state attorneys, to find out what tools they need from a legal perspective. I think this would be particularly important if you were serving at the state or federal level. I fall into a fairly analytical group. I want to see facts and I want to be able to fact check things. I'm not going to trust that somebody tells me the truth, even if I trust them. I want to see data. So a lot of what I'm looking at, I'm going to tie directly to data. And if it is my opinion, I'll let you know. So jumping in here, what is human trafficking? And for the sake of our time this evening, I'm going to throw another question in there. What is human smuggling? The ICE website says, human trafficking involves exploiting men, women, or children for the purposes of forced labor or commercial sexual exploitation. Human smuggling, however, involves the provision of a service, typically transportation or fraudulent documents, to an individual who voluntarily seeks to gain illegal entry into a country. I'd like to add that the relationship with the smuggler is going to be ended once that act is complete, whatever it is, whereas the relationship with the trafficker is going to be ongoing. When we look at the FBI's website, human trafficking is defined as involving the use of fraud, force, or coercion against a human being, resulting in a commercial sex act or general labor. Labor trafficking is obviously a huge problem. I only worked with sex trafficking, so when I refer to human trafficking, I'm specifically referring to, when I refer to human trafficking, I'm specifically referring to sex trafficking. Why am I highlighting the difference? What I personally see as a huge issue in the fight against human trafficking is a lack of understanding as to what it actually is. There are so many headlines and social media posts that will claim to be about human trafficking, but they will be describing something else. Based on that definition from the ICE website, all the people who are crossing our southern border illegally are participating in human smuggling. However, they are not all victims of human trafficking. The vulnerabilities they're experiencing by having crossed illegally, and the general character or lack thereof of the coyotes or the cartels will increase the risk of being trafficked, especially to unaccompanied minors. But to drive home the point, while the risk is increased, the act of crossing a border is not human trafficking, that is human smuggling. And it's important that we define things or we're not going to be able to fight them. The problem of human trafficking in the United States doesn't have to cross borders. It's Americans trafficking other Americans. It happens on the front-facing internet, and it's pervasive, and it's in every community. While it is a worldwide problem, and those in more vulnerable situations, those being smuggled, think about Ukraine, those in war zones or economically depressed areas, can be at higher risk for trafficking, my experience was only in the US. You may have heard someone say it's as easy to order a girl to your hotel room as it is to order a pizza. I hate to say it, but it's true. You don't need crazy computer skills. You don't need to know how to get to the dark web. You just need a smartphone. If it was difficult to do, they wouldn't be able to sell their victims. It has to be easy, so it has to be accessible. Our culture tends to glorify things that shouldn't. All it takes is a look at the news and the things that we tend to amplify and talk about to know that that's true. Culturally, I would argue that trafficking is considered cool. We use terms, and when I say we, I don't mean anybody here, because I have a hard time hearing anybody here saying that's pimping. Pop music or rap is frequently filled with references to hoes and pimps. This was a light bulb concept for me. What is a pimp? We talk about them all the time. They're kind of wound into our culture, but what is it? A person, it's generally a male, who has from one to several females that work for him via sex work. While that is a different set of vernacular, that is the literal definition of human trafficking. We have a person who is manipulating via fraud, force, or coercion, and that is the legal definition, which is important. You can't fight something if you don't understand and properly define it. Fraud, force, or coercion, another person, a hoe, or group of hoes to perform sex acts and return to give them the money. There's I think it was on Instagram that I saw it, and I can't remember for sure who the interviewer was, but it was an interviewer interviewing another man. It was two guys. And the question was, when did you know you were an entrepreneur? Keep in mind, this is being broadcasted to potentially millions of people. It's not something being secretively said or something that the individual wasn't proud of. But the question was, when did you know you were an entrepreneur? And the answer was something to the effect of, well, when I was a little boy, I think he said he was about 8. His dad went around to get all his money from his hoes, and he beat them to get the money. And my thought, mine being the interviewee, thought was, well, when I grow up, I'm going to be nice because then they'll want to give me their money. This individual felt comfortable saying this in a public forum and something that was going to be published. It is the literal definition from the governmental websites. The concept took me a little longer than I would like to admit to wrap my brain around, the pimp hoe being a trafficker and a trafficking victim. And I think it's because it's so pervasive in our culture that we've been almost conditioned to look past it as a normal, albeit immoral, but a normal thing. I remembered this yesterday. I actually remember the first time I saw a prostitute. And I'm laughing because my poor mother was the one that got to answer my question. I asked her about it. We had driven to Calgary and we were driving through town. I don't know why we were in this section of town. I was between the ages of 6 and 8. It was my mom and our preacher's wife and my brothers. But there was enough women standing on street corners in the pouring rain. I vividly remember the pouring rain, not crossing the street. And I was like, Mom, why are the ladies standing out in the rain like that? As an adult, I recognized that those women were likely trafficking victims, walking the blade or walking the strip, looking for Johns. Now, in 2022, the option of selling victims is more plentiful and accessible, but the strip is still one of them. Though generally my understanding, and I couldn't find anything to document this, but my understanding is that the strip or the blade or the areas of the streets where they walk are reserved for girls with pimps. So it's a much higher probability that the girls you see in those public locations are victims of trafficking. There's generally there's like an entire subculture built into this. And it doesn't sound like the pimps will let independent sex workers who are there of their own volition actually walk those areas. They have to do it via other means of selling themselves. The other places that these girls can be sold are places you'll have heard of. Some you may or may not expect. OnlyFans is probably one that rings a bell. Pornhub, another. Obvious Choice both have paywalls, and you can pay the subject, or in reality, her pimp or her trafficker directly. Other places these girls can be found is Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. I don't know if any of you have noticed, or if you're on Instagram, if you've noticed, there's a new option for an exclusive content subscription kind of thing. I have no intention of paying to see anything on Instagram, so I haven't clicked it. I haven't personally seen any examples of this, but I guarantee you, if an exploiter has an option to maximize profits by selling to multiple people at once without having to deliver the product and spend resources, they are. The mindset of a human trafficker is a business deal. You find a product, also known as a human, generally a female, but not always. You find a buyer, a John, and you sell the product or the person while maximizing profits, which is why so many of these victims that are being sold in person, so they're creating an ad, they're meeting with someone, they also have something like an OnlyFans. And now I'd be willing to bet my right arm that they're going to be utilizing that exclusive content feature on the Instagram app. Culturally, we need to change how we view things like pornography and OnlyFans. And this is kind of one of the things where I'm going to delve off for just a minute. Generally, what I see personally as a major problem with all of this is a lack of morality. If you were a trafficker and you want to create income, if you sell a person once, you've created one income stream. If you can take pictures of them and upload them to Pornhub, you are going to be able to get multiple transactions out of the same thing. You as a consumer have no way of knowing whether the thing you're looking at via OnlyFans or Pornhub, or quite frankly, in a person-to-person encounter, you don't know if that person is a victim. They're probably not going to tell you, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. I would like to see our culture change, not just for the sake of morality. I'm a Christian, so obviously I believe pornography is bad and it has ill health effects. But one of my concerns is that when we talk about pornography, particularly, we are not also including to the people that we're trying to get to understand that it's wrong, that frequently it is excluding people who have been trafficked and they have no way of knowing. It's one of the things I'd like to see us talk about more. You don't know what's on the other side of that image. We don't just condemn porn because it's immoral and it creates low testosterone and lower IQs. You may inadvertently be victimizing a person who didn't have a choice. Another point I want to make sure and communicate is that victims often don't know they're victims. This seems counterintuitive. How could that be? If they don't know they're victims, how can they actually be victims? This was something I really struggled to understand until I read a book by a gal named Tamia Nagy. And the book is called Out of the Shadows, a Memoir. I am going to put a trigger warning on there. If you have a history of sexual assault, this book has some pretty rough stuff in it. I'm not going to fully delve into the book, but I did feel like it was extremely helpful for me to kind of get my arms around that side of it. And how someone would not know that they're a victim, and then the mentality that's beat into these folks, that if they talk to the police, they're the ones that are going to be in trouble. Ultimately, this book, she'd been manipulated into feeling like she was indebted to her traffickers, which happened to be a fairly sophisticated ring that spanned a couple countries. She was in Canada and she was from Hungary. They used the threat of force against her family back in Hungary if she didn't comply, as well as shame if her mother had found out what she had been doing. And in the victim's eyes, she felt like she had become a willing, air quotes, prostitute. The social shame and disassociation would have been completely unbearable. Being aware of how victims are used and manipulated is important in how we work to help people. If you've ever flown through a large airport and used the bathroom, I've always assumed this is in the boys' bathroom too. Maybe it's just in the girls' bathroom, but there's frequently signs on the back of the door that will say something to the effect of, "Are you being trafficked?" If a victim won't necessarily self-identify as a victim, what good is that piece of paper? What good is that question? Is it helpful? If there was a desire to do an anti-human trafficking campaign and to put information out there to truly try and help people, wouldn't it be more effective to look at some commonalities in the victims and ask those questions? For example, they could include, are you being forced to work without being paid? Do the people you work for withhold food if you do not meet your goals? Are you in control of your own identification documents? Obviously, we all want to end human trafficking, but we need to make sure our efforts are effective and will actually do something. Our country is very confused, as I'm sure all of you would agree. And unfortunately, we tend to be addicted to sensationalism. Social media will frequently exacerbate the problem and spread stories of how people were almost trafficked or marked for trafficking, and then include some elaborate but unlikely scheme. Money on the windshield is one that I've seen where somebody will tuck it under the windshield wipers, zip ties on the door frames. Another one that I've seen is, might have been back in 2020, it was the Wayfarer's cabinet, where an article had come out insisting that Wayfarers was selling girls that had been kidnapped via these big cabinets. We see the stories, we start thinking about the people we love who might be naive or not physically capable of defending themselves. And we want to make sure they're aware of what's going on, and we share those stories or posts. We have good intentions, and we don't want those we love to be human trafficking victims. While those stories may share examples of someone's intent to do someone else harm, it doesn't hold up that they are examples of trafficking scams. They are likely kidnapping. They may be up to absolutely no good. Carjacking would be one, kidnapping would be one, just plain robbery, plenty of bad things. But it doesn't follow logic, and we'll get into that in just a second. It doesn't follow logic that they are trafficking scams. If we are only identifying problems that don't actually meet the threshold of what we're talking about. So in this case, if we're talking about human trafficking and then explaining how someone's going to carjack you, how is it helpful to the entire scenario when now we don't know how to fight back because it's not the actual problem? Something I came to understand while I was doing this was that most victims will go willingly to a trafficker after an extended period of grooming. And much of that grooming takes place on social media. While this probably isn't what you were expecting to hear, it is the point that I most want to drive home. A knowing and unwilling victim will be difficult and ultimately cost a trafficker time and money. If, back to our scenario of the zip ties or the money, somebody was trafficking me and I'm not spectacularly strong, or I'm definitely not stronger than a man. If someone managed to grab me and take me, they aren't going to traffic me because I am not going to cooperate. I am going to fight back. At some point, you have to surrender your victim to complete this transaction, and the trafficker is not physically there. I'm not going to cooperate. What that ends up doing is creating more time and more money where this trafficker now has to force me to do these things via drugs, via physical force, whatever. It doesn't make financial sense. Not that these guys are brilliant, but they're after money, and they're after money in the easiest way possible. A nonprofit called the Polaris Project compiles data in conjunction with the US Department of Health and Human Services, and lists for 2020 that the recruitment for Facebook went up 125%, and Instagram went up 95% from the prior year. And the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children says the average age of a sex trafficking victim is 15. They also say 1 in 6 kids have been contacted by a stranger on the internet. I don't have kids. I do have nieces and nephews, and they are currently not old enough to have social media accounts, for which I'm very thankful. When they do, I'm hoping, with of course their parents' permission, one of whom is on tonight, to talk to them about safety and what happens on social media, and in an age-appropriate way, of course, the things that I've seen. The Polaris report that was printed with those stats made it clear that in the majority of cases, it is not kidnapping or a complicated scheme. They are cases where the victim had a relationship and a level of trust with the perpetrator. In fact, that report found in 2020 that 31% of trafficking victims, and I think this was sex and labor, had been recruited by a family member or a caregiver, ultimately someone they knew and well. For minors, and this is older minors, as heartbreaking as it is, the younger minors that are in these situations are trafficked by family members. There's an awful article that came out of Spokane this week where a woman was trafficking her 6-year-old daughter for a place to stay and a pair of tennis shoes. And unfortunately, in the United States, that younger age group, it is a family member. It is mom, it is dad, it's somebody within that close-knit circle. For the older minors, where are they spending a large amount of time? Social media. Where are they going to be easiest to contact and develop relationships with? Social media. We spend so much time focusing on protecting the vulnerable around us from real and perceived threats, and we should. But how much time are we spending on internet safety? How many of these victims, specifically minor victims, do not have a parent or a guardian that spent time monitoring their social media or general phone and computer activities? We expect the dangers of the world to stay outside and that children are safe once they are in their home. Reality is, if they have a smartphone, we may be sending the worst of the worst into their bedrooms with them at night. It is so important that children's activity is monitored. Who are they talking to? How are they being talked to? And that parents keep an open dialogue with them. I don't have kids. I don't presume to be able to tell people how to raise their kids, but this is the part of human trafficking that scares me. I think it is so important that when you have these discussions, you make sure and communicate that your child will not be in trouble for bringing things to your attention, or that they will not be in trouble for being honest, or if a person has done something inappropriate, that they, the kids, know that they are not responsible for the other person's behavior. Don't shut off the line of communication by reacting poorly. I had had a conversation with a friend who's very closely monitored her children's social media account. Not social media, internet activity. And the child was watching some pre-approved YouTube videos and an ad popped on. I don't remember what the content of the ad was, but it was completely inappropriate and unacceptable. And the child brought parent the thing and mom lost it, freaking out, and then realized what she was doing and stopped and said, I am not mad at you. I am upset with this. This is wrong. You did exactly what you were supposed to do by bringing me this video. I tend to react first and think about it, and then I have to kind of backtrack. So I just want to make sure that same concept follows this through. One thing that I want to highlight, a minor is unable to consent to be sold for sexual purposes. There's consent laws in every state. I don't know what they are. I've never paid attention, but federal law is clear that minors do not have the capacity. They are unable to consent to be sold for commercial sex. There is no such thing as a child prostitute. Children, anyone under the age of 18, is a victim, and it's sex acts or rape of a child. That's it. When you read an article and they say something about a child prostitute, we're just whitewashing what it is, and it drives me crazy. It is rape of a child, end of story, and it should not be discussed in any other terms. I have personal opinions that I think this is being done partially to create more acceptance of pedophilia. I can't prove that. I have nothing to do to back that up. But given the social state we're in and watching people try and normalize that, I feel like that's got to be in there. We have to use real world terms. If it is a child, it is rape. End of story. One thing that I also want to mention in terms of the legal requirements for cases involving minors, anybody under the age of 18, there is no requirement on behalf of law enforcement to prove fraud, force, or coercion. It is automatically there. It is trafficking 100% of the time. Obviously, this is fairly brief and simplified in terms of an overview of human trafficking. There's so much more that could be said. I tried to break it down into a manageable piece while hitting what I felt were some of the most important parts, both for you guys and what the things that concern me the most. And then knowing that this group is political and has political hopes. And I hope for people to get into positions and to be able to work on more legislation that will help stop this. And that's what I had for you.
Thank you, Sierra. Unbelievable that this is still so much as we hear the term, the sexual trafficking and human trafficking. You're absolutely right. A lot of times it's not used in the right context, according to the definition. And I think that's part of the reason it gets washed away in all that noise that's out there. So having you on and pointing to the fact that this is what's happening, I don't think it's an accident, Sierra. I think that's part of the overall plan. And you said you don't have any proof about, pedophilia and that this is part of that. There are places that are getting that proof out. We've talked to them, and last week's guest actually pointed to some of those. So it's becoming more and more, I think, people like us, people who care, people who do have integrity and morals, Christian or otherwise. I'm going to the integrity and moral core first, because we know what's right and we know what's wrong. We are pulling that curtain back. It's us right now. What's happening here? It's what you do. When you were doing your analysis and even preparing for this, we are pulling that curtain back, and that's shining light on the darkness. And I think that's the only way to say it. So I want, if you would, could you get in the chat? Do you have the link for, how to financially support Deliver Fund? You mentioned that you support them financially. We know it's a 501c3. If you could put that in the chat notes,
sure.
That's something we can promote as well. So that was the first thing that I wanted to bring up. And then the second thing, and it gets back to, I've heard this term in the last couple of weeks, and I didn't think of it again until your talk tonight. Victims don't know they're victims. And that gets directly to, the Stockholm syndrome. They start feeling dependent on and even have a love relationship, a special relationship with people. Sure. Yeah. So, that does take time, and that is the grooming aspect. And you brought that up, grooming. They're being manipulated, and especially if they're minors, they are being manipulated. And that gets away from that fraud, force, or coercion, because they've been manipulated. And that brings us back to your point that, well, if it's sex act, it's still illegal. It's still rape. So we can't let people whitewash this. The other thing that I wanted to bring out real quick, and I know that this is an area you're interested in as well, and that's the grooming aspect by normalizing pornography, by normalizing even soft porn, like we see in the books in the library today that are in the juvenile section, right? And it just dawned on me, I wrote down one word here because we've been using the word grooming and manipulation, and all of a sudden grooming is now a bad word to use because it's hurting people's feelings, right? Yeah. And You know what it is though?
Okay with that.
Yeah, I am too. I'll hurt their feelings. But part of what they're doing is they're desensitizing our youth to the fact that sexuality is something that's personal, private, and pure. By desensitizing it, they're animalizing it. You know, they're normalizing it and animalizing it and taking it out of the context. And that's why I have such an aversion to, you know, what's going on in our local libraries, what's going on in our school libraries, how school boards are turning the other cheek. And so if you would speak to that a little bit too, I know that you obviously have done more research in this area, but grooming, desensitizing, normalizing, what can we do more than what we're doing now?
I think a lot of this is going to fall back, and this is we're getting into full-on Sierra opinion here. I think this is culture war stuff. I have seen more. Most likely I saw them on Instagram because I don't have an active Facebook account, and I follow various political commentators or whatever, but I have seen more recently older teenagers or young adults, young 20s, late teens, talking about how they got hooked on pornography at young ages. The one I'm thinking of specifically, I believe the girl said she was like 13. Just horrifying. There's such a push in our pop culture, especially. You look at what pop culture artists are wearing on stage or the behavior that they're exhibiting on stage, what we've seen at the Super Bowl halftime show, where we have the wardrobe malfunctions or whatever, where it is constantly being shoved in our face a little bit at a time. And I don't know what we do in terms of stopping it. I feel like the slippery slope analogy really kicks in here. I think about the things we've allowed a little bit at a time, where it's like, I don't really care what you do you in your home as long as you leave me. We're no longer there. And so is it because we started there and we're just like, stay away, you do your thing. If you want to participate in this activity, you do it at your own risk. Just keep me and mine out of it. And I don't feel like that's an option anymore. I was talking to Taylor about this recently. It used to be that I feel like you were really demonized for having moral opinions or standing up for stuff. And there for a long time, it seemed like if you spoke out against something immoral or questioned whether or not those books should be in school or in the library or something else, you were going to be demonized. And people, not my circus, not my monkeys, I'm not going to fight this fight. I'm going to pay attention to my thing over here. And so it was a lot more risk. There was a lot more to lose for those individuals who were willing to fight. I don't know if we're there anymore. I feel like there might be a shift in culture coming because people are getting louder. It's like we hit a breaking point and people are pushing back. We're still demonized, but now, you can only be called a racist, sexist, bigot so many times before you're like, cool, I'm not, that's your problem, not mine. And you can call me whatever you want, but I'm going to stand up and say that this material has no business being in a library. It's unacceptable that children are sexualized. Fill in the blank with whatever topic you want to stick in there. I feel like there's a shift in our culture, which is good. We just got to keep getting louder.
Well, I totally agree. And that's part of why you're on our show tonight, because we are amplifying the voice, and we are all getting louder and being more educated, especially about terminology and misuse of terminology. We have to be careful with our words. And you've really pointed that out tonight. If we're going to be specific, we need to be specific, right? And not just talk in general senses. And Jim, I'm going to have you jump in here in just a second, but I pulled up on the CDC website. I was looking for what they had to say about preventing child sexual abuse within youth servicing organizations. This was the only thing I could find that was specific toward grooming. Youth serving organizations. Well, everything is a youth serving organization. You know, if you go into a school, that's a youth serving organization, right? So this applies, and people, this isn't like it's you know, a private party or swim lessons or something like that. It's everywhere kids are is a youth serving organization. And one of the things they said was inappropriate or harmful was showing pornography or involving youth in pornographic activities. But the first is just showing pornography. And that puts that behavior, that's on the CDC website.
Wonder how long before that gets taken down.
Well, I imagine some of it's already been taken down.
Yeah.
But I went looking and I thought there would be more, and that's the only thing I could actually find. So some of it may have already been pulled, but that was still there. And it's under examples of appropriate, inappropriate, harmful behavior from youth serving organizations on the CDC website. So that report was written in 2007. My guess is they will start changing the language on that to meet, you know, the shifting cultural crap that's going on. The other thing is, you said it's a culture war, and I think it's more than that. I think it's a spiritual war, and I'm going to leave that alone for now, because this has to be fought on every front, including thoughtful men and women of prayer. So, Jim, can you weigh in on this too?
Yeah, thanks, Rod. Sierra, thanks for your presentation. It's sickening to me, especially having two daughters in my house that are 6 and 8, that have a lot of life in front of them, and the challenge of keeping them from being exposed to this stuff is going to be insurmountable as it continues to get worse. Rod, by the way, I found on the CDC website a couple months ago how one of the leading factors to becoming a pedophile is pornographic material and books. And I used that statement in my position with the library when I gave the speech. But what's interesting is I haven't been able to find it again through a variety of searches on the CD website. So I don't know if it's been pulled down, but it's certainly buried to the point where I was fortunate enough to find it once. I haven't been able to find it again.
I printed it,
you know, we'll see
when I found it.
Yeah, good job. Sierra, I do have some questions for you, but I should note, and I didn't realize this was happening to me, and I imagine it happens to a lot of social media influencers. And I suppose I'll call myself an influencer to the respect that I've have over about 12,000 followers between my various channels. I heard an influencer that had, I don't know, he's got like 500,000 followers. He said the algorithms are attacking him with pornographic material. And, you know, I wasn't really sure what he meant by that. He goes, you know, I pop up my Instagram and all of a sudden in the suggested stories, he started seeing more females pop up, you know, twerking or doing different things, you know, or booty shots or whatever. And I realized that was happening to me as well. So, you know, I have my stories on Instagram, people that I follow, and then I can look through posts that people have done, but then they have suggested stuff. And a lot of that's based on algorithms. So what I started doing is every pickup truck or cowboy that popped up, I started liking that stuff to hopefully wash out the other. But it's just interesting how they force feed you like, oh, we suggest this. And, you know, I don't know if it's because it's a male age demographic that they're pushing that stuff down my throat, but it's a lot like what you said with the kids on YouTube, that they're forcing stuff to the kids as they're watching, you know, kid-friendly YouTube stuff. All of a sudden they get a commercial for something that's not. That happened to my daughter a couple of weeks ago. It was, are you gay enough? And it was a test that you could take online or answer the questions. And my daughter brought it to me. You know, she was watching a kid's thing that we've overseen before that was friendly. And she goes, Daddy, look at this. It's on my YouTube. I'm like, oh my gosh, do not touch that, right? Because I can just see what happens when she goes down that road. Am I gay enough? And all of a sudden the questions are like, oh, do you ride a horse? Do you play in the yard? Do you play in the dirt? She starts saying yes to those things. Says, oh, you must be a boy. You know, but literally they're just normal kid stuff. So anyways, it's happening. It's attacking our kids. and it concerns me. My question for you though, and I don't know how far back you've gone in your research, this human trafficking epidemic is what I'm going to call it. At least that's what it feels like to me. It feels like it's really come to light in the last couple of years. I know it's been around much longer than that, but are we at a pinnacle where it's really so bad that it can't be hidden anymore? Or are we just doing a better job of exposing it and through our own awareness? But it seems like mid-Trump, administration, it started popping up just as he came to the tail end more. And in the last 2 years, I feel like it's everywhere in the conservative news, if you will. So how old is this problem and how bad is it really right now?
I would say there's nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes says that. I was actually thinking about that last week, and it's like slavery has been an issue since the inception of the world. We're getting louder. People are getting louder. It's being talked about. I don't have any of the stats in front of me. In 2020, when everything shut down, there was a mass influx of data online, ads being posted, all kinds of things that people were doing, so that Pornhub, that OnlyFans, all of those things kind of exploded. I don't know if the ease with which you can get stuff has changed. Back to my story in Calgary, I was 7. I was born before the internet. I don't know what year the internet started. Pretty sure those women were not being sold via online at that point. There was limited places to sell a person. That's not the case anymore. It is so easy. When I say it is literally as easy as ordering a pizza, it is literally easy as ordering a pizza. I could go right now and find however many in the local area that we are right now. I don't imagine that will have shrunk the numbers. I don't know what numbers used to be. The other side of that is it's not like these guys are filling out census forms. So in terms of how many there actually are, I don't know that we have a real good grasp on that. There's not a few, there's a bunch.
Yeah. So, and I understand the challenge to pinpoint that. It's my understanding that we have quite the trafficking problem here in the state of Montana, and if not worse, in Flathead as to other parts of the state. Have you seen any data to support that? And if that's the case, what's our approach, regardless if that's the case, to our elected officials and or our local sheriff's department? How do we as citizens really light a fire under them to do more?
It is a problem in Montana. Guarantee you we've had it here. I actually found, let me see if I can pull it back up here. I found a site, and unfortunately it's from 2019. And it is from the National Human Trafficking Hotline statistics. I did not find a newer one. So during 2019, there were 74 victims identified in the state of Montana. There were 21 different traffickers identified and 4 trafficking victims. They actually have a map of the state of Montana. Can I screen share on this thing? Let me see. Oh, nope. So on this map, they have dots highlighted where all of these things were. The biggest dot is over the Flathead. There is like a heat map, and the biggest one is over the Flathead. So yes, it is a problem here. I did not specifically work here or investigate things here in Montana. I know that is something that is on our county sheriff's radar. It's something they work on. It requires funding. Gonna get on my little soapbox here. When everything went to pot in 2020, the riots started, defund the police started. The basic police function has to be served. We have to have patrol deputies. We have to have police officers patrolling the streets, or highway patrol patrolling, the state, meeting the base need functions. when you cut funding from law enforcement, you end up cutting, and this is my opinion, the sheriffs, I mean, they're filling as best they can. He'd be able to give you more of a breakdown, but it is the extra stuff that gets cut. It's not the base. If I call 911, somebody has to get here. The act of going out and hunting human traffickers is unfortunately something that's going to come out of a surplus budget or a budget that meets more than the base necessities. I have my opinions for Flathead County. I think we are grossly underfunded. We need to talk to the officials and make sure that our law enforcement is fully supported, that they have the funding to hire adequate staff, and that they have the tools and the technology that's available, and that they can get it and use it.
Thanks, Sierra. Something just occurred to me, while we were talking, and it has to do with, it seems like this is a bigger problem. It's a newer problem. It's an in-our-face problem because of the internet and social media. And Jim, when he brought up the algorithms, this is a big tech issue, and I believe that they're complicit. If they're doing algorithms for this, they are now complicit in child pornography and probably human trafficking as well. And maybe it's time for conservatives, if there are any judges, district attorneys out there, lawyers, maybe we need to start filing a bunch of lawsuits as conservatives and go after these people. How did Epstein get away with it for so long? Crazy. Anyway, Samantha, you've got a question. Your hand is up. Go ahead and unmute.
All right, sorry, I always have to refigure this out. Hi, Sierra, thanks for being on. I appreciate it. I'm Jim's wife, by the way. Anyways, I listened to all this, and having little girls on top of it is just horrifying to me. And anyways, I won't go into too much detail on the situation, but what woke me up to this whole, trafficking that was horrifying to me is, and I know you said that typically they don't know they're being trafficked, or, a lot of times it's like personal relationships. And I think my situation was a fluke, crazy thing, but I felt completely defenseless. So just a little brief, we were living in Southern California. Me and my two girls were at Target. They were little. And at the end of the situation, there's this man and woman, and they keep cornering me and my child, or both my kids, into like these aisles where I can get away with carts. And I grab my kids and I take off, and I go running, and I'm screaming through the store because they had done it numerous times where I cannot get away. And I am defenseless because I have two little girls on my side and not understanding what's going on. But anyways, I'm running through the store yelling for somebody to help, and nobody's paying attention, and they're looking at me like a psychopath while these people are chasing after me. And I finally get to the front, and I'm like, I need help. These people are following me. They're trying to take my kids, is what I thought. And that's what I told the people. Finally, they grabbed me and take me to the side. They had their security and stuff. And this man and woman stand at the door and do this to me. They're going to meet me in the parking lot. Right. And I'm horrified. They call the cops. They go through the video, and little did I know, these people had been following me for 20 minutes before I'd even noticed them. And anyways, they called the cops and things like that. And Jim had talked to a friend. Sorry, they didn't call the cops at that time. And anyways, they were like, well, it's not the kids you should have been worried about. It was your wife. If they were going to take somebody, they were in it for your wife. And I'm sitting here freaked out over my children and how I felt defenseless because I have two little kids, and I felt like there was nothing I could do. But that was what woke me up to trafficking, and just the fact that you're not safe. We're not safe anywhere. And it's super unfortunate. Thank God, we live in the great state of Montana, but I still don't take that for granted. And anyways, I just appreciate you bringing all these things to light. And, unfortunately, some of us have to have those crazy, scary moments, or, things like that for us to wake up to this. But please keep doing what you're doing and getting the word out. And we all need to quit worrying about people's feelings and stand up and make more of a noise about this. Because I always say the left gets a lot of things done, but it's not because, they're doing great things. It's because they're loud. They're loud, and they don't care about other people's feelings. And here as Republicans, sometimes I feel like, oh, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings and stuff like that. But we need to be loud, and we need to be vocal about this. And it is horrifying. So thank you very much.
That sounds awful. I'm glad you and the girls were okay. That is not something anybody ever wants to deal with.
All right. Well, thank you for your input. And I've heard that story, Samantha. And it terrifies me hearing it again. You know, it's like, how brazen can people be in this day and age? How brazen is that? So ultimately, we're all vulnerable, and we need to have our radar on, right? We always have to be watchful. And I also am a fan of concealed carry. So ladies, you're never defenseless when you're packing. So that's all I'll say about that right now. We'll have another episode going deeper into that. If there are no other questions, I'm going to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you again so much. Our eyes are always opened. We're always inspired and motivated, as we were tonight. Again, Sierra, I think ordinary people doing extraordinary things inspires all of us. So thank you for taking the courage to speak out, speak up. It wasn't hard. You did a great job, and we'll have you back.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sierra. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Good night.